Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar where we're focusing on the human element of COVID-19. For those that I haven't met, my name is Scott Way, and I'm the Director of the Industrial and Organisational Psychology team within BDO. By way of explanation, BDO is a firm of chartered accountants and business advisors, and so our team sits within the advisory space. And so I was hoping today just to focus on the human element, or if you like, the psychology associated with COVID-19. You'll see the presentations split into effectively two halves. One focusing on your role as a manager, if you happen to be a manager, but then and how to manage yourself, but also how to support and assist your staff. So, so there's, if you like, it's a presentation in stereo. Ironically, although we're talking about the human element of COVID-19 in a fashion not dissimilar to Maslow's hierarchy, I suppose I just wanted to begin by highlighting the significance of folks managing their personal and organisational finances. Very difficult to talk about supporting staff if you're struggling to stay in business. So quite unashamedly, this is a plug for my accounting colleagues. So if you're looking for support in the business services and tax area, then they can help you with government programs that are out there, as well as talking about revenue and cash projections. Our management consulting team can assist you with enhancing efficiency if you have to do more with less, and certainly our private wealth experts can review your personal circumstances to make sure that you've got a degree of peace of mind. So as much as there's a lot of talk about managing the individual, at the bottom line, if you're trying to run a business, the business needs to stay in business in order to employ those people. With that said, now we can sort of turn our attention also to your staff. Your staff may also need some support around their current financial circumstances, and one thing you can encourage them to do is to seek out that assistance from their own accountant or BDO, and in fact they may need that financial assistance or advice or guidance more than an EAP program, and some of that might simply be to confirm that they are on firm ground, or that they have 6 months of breathing space, or they areas where they can trim back their finances. So again, don't be afraid to point them towards their trusted advisor, but if again they don't have one, then maybe point them in the direction of your trusted advisor. Now, I'll sort of break down the presentation into various tranches of information, and the first has to do with information. And it's important to remind ourselves that the way we process information, of course, has a significant bearing on the way we're thinking and acting. Now, the media, particularly the commercial media, are very concerned to grab our attention. There's a lot of competing avenues for information out there, and so it's tempting for them, and it's tempting to us to sort of zero in on the negative stories. But it can mean that, in fact, we get bombarded by this information, and it can be quite overwhelming. And I thank our lucky stars that we're in Australia and not in other countries, because, again, some of the images that we see from other countries are just horrific. So it is important to manage your information intake. And so how do we do this? Well, without wanting to be too specific about it, certainly I'd strongly advise you to limit your news intake to 1 or 2 sessions a day, tops, and for that information to come from trusted sources, such as the Commonwealth Department of Health or the Department of Health in your own state, but not from Facebook and not from Twitter and not from various blogs or other sources where rumours run rife, and conspiracy stories are alive. The temptation can be that we import those images into our lounge rooms and into our heads, and that generates an unnecessary level of fear. If I just talk about our own state of South Australia, and there are some of you from other jurisdictions, in relative terms, we're doing pretty well. It's unfortunate that anyone should be unwell or even pass away, but by comparison with some other countries, we are doing famously. So try and manage your information intake so that it's grounded, it's relevant to the context that you're operating in. But also maybe we can try and manage the information intake for our colleagues, and there needs to be some balance. Again, it's tempting to talk about the horror stories that we've seen or heard about, but we do need to be reminding ourselves and in turn our colleagues or our staff, our teams, of some of the good news. And there is some remarkable good news out there. The fact that we're flattening the curve, that's a term that will forever live in our vocabulary from now on. The recovery rates are fantastic. Yes, we hear about deaths, but we also need to pay attention to the number of people who have contracted the virus, but also then survived. Some fantastic stories of neighbours helping neighbours and simply hanging over the fence, offering meals, doing shopping for each other, simply saying g'day to neighbours and maintaining some of that social contact. Businesses doing a wonderful job of repurposing themselves, whether that be a cafe down the road, a manufacturing firm. There's any number of these good stories where these businesses have pivoted beautifully to provide a service as well as to obviously stay in business. Healthcare workers going above and beyond, putting themselves in the line of fire, so to speak. But simple things. A lovely story the other day of two young Italian women who were playing rooftop tennis. But again, wonderful examples of innovation and creativity, just enjoying some of the opportunities that strangely coronavirus presents. But also some humour, and there's I don't know that I enjoy that coronavirus burger there. That would have me thinking twice, but again, there's any number of those examples out there. So a balanced information intake. Yes, there's some negative stuff. Yes, we need to be mindful of the tried and proven health things that we need to be doing, but there's also some good news stories out there as well. So if you're having a team meeting with your colleagues, remind them of some of the good news stuff. Encourage them, gently force them to think about some of the positive things that are coming about. It will help them to maintain some balance. Now, it's also important to realise that as we've changed our work practices, and some of you are working from home, some of you are working in different places, some of you are working in different shifts, that all of this produces change. And you'll see that quote there from William James, that in fact habit is the great flywheel of society. Human beings love routines, and we get into our comfort zones. And pre-COVID, we had our morning routine, our work routine, our evening routine, our weekly routine, our weekend routines. All of that stuff is quite comforting because it's one less thing that we have to think about. So along comes COVID. It changes things such as working arrangements, maybe a lack of organised sport that you participated in or watched, limited socialising, again, limited numbers in a meeting area or even gatherings. Physical distancing, I've got to say I'm not a fan of the word social distancing, because we need not be socially distanced, because we can pick up a phone, we can have a Teams meeting, so I much prefer to use the term physical distancing. All of that stuff is understandably unsettling. So we do need to, it's like a speed bump, so we need to accept that things are different. By clear definition, you just need to drive down the road or walk down the street and you'll see things are different. The issue can be, though, that individuals' response to those changes is enormously idiosyncratic, much like stress. And so for some, those changes can be quite unsettling for them, perhaps beyond what you might consider appropriate. For others, seem quite unruffled by it. So it is very idiosyncratic, but at the end of the day, we do need to remind ourselves that we as humans are enormously adaptive. And we respond and cope with a whole variety of weird and wonderful situations, whether that be pandemics of the past, world wars, depressions, and the list just goes on. So if you have staff who are feeling unsettled, and yourself, you need to remind yourself that the fact that you are feeling unsettled is in fact quite normal, and that we are, in fact, it would be strange if we were not unsettled. So just be aware of that. Also, sorry, just let me get control of this thing again. We also need to be managing the change for our colleagues, and so we can encourage them, can't force them, but we can encourage them to do a number of things that in fact will have them feeling better. For example, going to work as normal. Now, if folks are working from home, then have them still go to work as normal, but they might shower and dress and prepare, and the commute might be from their family room into their study, but they're still going to work as normal. Encourage them to do a daily to-do list, partly to keep them focused, but also it takes their mind off what might be going on around them. They simply feel better by focusing on their to-do list and the things that they need to get done that day. Encourage them to stay in touch with colleagues, just as we would encourage our colleagues to do that in the office, that just because someone's on another floor or in another building doesn't put them in another postcode. So we can go for a walk and go and see them. We can do the same remotely, again, if folks are working remotely. Try and maintain your exercise routines, and if possible, you might try and up it a tad, partly because getting out of the confines of your house, if you're at home, can be important, in fact is important for getting some fresh air. But again, if you're working in a different work environment, different routines, try and maintain that physical activity. People are more resilient when they are physically healthier. And ensuring that you've got healthy sleeping patterns. And again, you don't need me to tell you how the research in recent years has highlighted the importance of sleep and maintaining good physical and psychological health. So again, what we're talking about are just the sort of things that you would have done in a normal pre-COVID workday, except we're just doing these in a different situation. So we're modifying them to suit. But again, if you're working from home or a different work environment or a different routine or a different shift, is in a sense no good reason to abandon some of those practices that we found effective and reassuring. So stick with what you know. That normal, in inverted commas, is in fact a healthy state. We can do the same for our colleagues. So just as you're trying to manage yourself, we can manage our colleagues through various situations as well. So work with them to develop a plan and a timeline to manage your team. Now that could be a week out or a fortnight out or a month out, but again, we feel better when there's a bit of a plan. One of the most disturbing things that we can do is just, well, let's just wait and see. That's not a good place for psychologically for people to be in, because that level of uncertainty is in fact a fertile ground for fear and anxiety. So having a plan, even if the plan turns out to be a bit wonky in a week's time or a fortnight's time, doesn't matter, we do another plan, but certainly it's important to do a plan. Communicate clearly, succinctly and often to the team and to the individuals to provide appropriate leadership. Again, in this regard, I have to say that even our own firm, BDO, has done a fantastic job in this regard. And it's interesting, as a consultant, I'm not just a sole trader, I'm part of a larger firm of about 180 staff. So we've been living this, and it's been interesting to see what works and what doesn't work. And certainly the communication within BDO over the last month or 6 weeks, I think, has been fantastic. And it has been regular, clear, and readily digestible. I mentioned appropriate leadership. Sometimes, there's the view that there's a best type of leadership. Some organisations, some sectors prefer leadership from the front. Other organisations, other sectors prefer leadership from the middle. Other teams, other environments prefer leadership from the rear. So you need to find a style of leadership that works with your colleagues. And again, if it's normal, it's the way you normally do things, then continue on with that. Certainly, you don't have to change style or change channel to cope with COVID. Quite the reverse. But nonetheless, acknowledge individuals' concerns, but remind them that these are strange times. So as I said, it's normal to feel a tad unsettled. But also agree on plans and goals and targets that provide focus for the individuals. Again, there's a psychological phenomenon called thought stopping. It literally is helpful for staff to focus on things through the day and through the week, because it stops them thinking about COVID-19 and then in turn catastrophizing. You absolutely don't want staff catastrophizing. So those weekly plans, those daily to-do lists, they seem small, they're enormously useful. Now, we need to be managing wellness and wellness of your colleagues. It's interesting, just to be a little bit pedantic, wellness focuses on the daily activity, so your mood, if you like, today, and to a lesser degree tomorrow. So as I mentioned, setting your daily to-do list, both work and personal, is important. It is important whether you're at work or working from home that you do things for you as well, and that could be acknowledging someone's birthday or purchasing a gift or a card for someone close to you. So set your daily to-do list and for both work and personal. But again, it's important that you reward yourself for achieving some of those significant tasks. Have a healthy diet that works for you. Hopefully by now you've worked out what diets are good for you. Some people don't like breakfast, others, breakfast is essential. I use myself as an example. I prefer to have 6 smaller meals a day rather than 3 large meals. So find out what works for you. Set yourself a daily or weekly challenge. Again, there's been plenty of press around people trying things whilst they've been at home or working in different places or working in a different form. So that weekly challenge could be mastering the technology of a Teams cast or a webcast. It might be ensuring that you can download documents appropriately. It might simply be mastering the slow cooker. So all of those sorts of activities are useful and are productive. What it also does psychologically, of course, is that it says, hey, I can do this. You've taken yourself outside of that comfort zone a little bit, not significantly. You've challenged yourself a little bit, and if you succeeded, then you reward yourself. If not, then you might go around again and have another go at it. At the same time, though, appreciate some of the differences. If you are working from home, the differences can be great. It might be simply sitting in the backyard, enjoying the midday sun, which if you're in an office, maybe you won't do. If you are working from an office, then going outside and seeing that the air is fresher because there are fewer cars on the road. If you are driving or commuting that you think, gee, I wish every day was like this, let's enjoy it while we can. Certainly stay in touch with friends and family, again, maintaining those social connections. So they needn't be the social distance. We want to maintain the physical distance, but there's certainly no need to maintain social distance. And then doing something for others. Again, it makes us feel better to do things for others. Now, whether that's opening a door, whether that's purchasing some groceries for a neighbour, whether it's simply just calling someone you hadn't spoken to for a while just to check on them, all of that stuff makes them feel better. It makes you feel better. Remember though, again, without wanting to sound like a 5-year-old in a kindergarten, you're in charge of you. Again, sometimes we hear messages that, oh, this happened and it was bad or it was done to me. Well, all of you are in the driver's seat. You have choices about how to respond, what to do, what not to do. That's known as locus of control, which I'll touch on shortly. And we feel better when we have a greater sense of control. Things you can do for your colleagues, you can ask them what they're planning for the day. So if you're having a telephone conference with your team members, ask them what they're planning for the day. Now, that's not just important in a work sense, but also it's important in a psychological sense. What are the things that you intend to do? Again, if you're having a phone conversation with them or a team catch-up via some sort of video platform, then you ask them what they've achieved that day or that week. Again, creating an expectation that it is about achieving things and doing things that are productive. It could be things that if they don't have enough work at the minute because work's slowing down, it could be things that they've achieved at home, and they might have painted a room, they might have trimmed a hedge, they might have, as I said, done a good deed for a neighbour. But also ask them how they're thinking and how they're feeling. Two different constructs. Clearly, how people are thinking and how they're feeling may, in fact, be slightly different. They may be thinking okay, but still feeling a bit unsettled. So ask the two questions. Ask them about the good things that have occurred that day or that week, again, trying to maintain some of that balance. And maybe you can do something positive for them that's unexpected. It might be ordering some flowers because they've gone above and beyond. It might be sending them an email just to say thank you for doing X, Y, or Z. But also remind them, your colleagues, that they too have choices about how they see things and how they respond to circumstances. Now, if we're looking, we'll talk, so wellness is the sort of day-to-day activity, the resilience is more of the long-standing activity over a longer period, and there are some things that you can do to strengthen your own resilience. So what are they? Well, again, some of this information is taken from Martin Seligman's work out of the University of Pennsylvania. Purpose, there is absolutely no doubt, and the research is crystal clear, that those individuals who are clearer about why they're doing what they're doing are more resilient. So reflect on why you're doing what you're doing. If you're running a business and it's struggling, think about, well, why am I doing this? Yes, it might be to pay the bills and earn a living, but also, again, if you were running a supermarket, then in fact you're providing a good. You're providing a service to the community. If you're got a mowing around, again, that's providing a valuable service to people. It's interesting how some of the jobs that we might have thought were menial, in fact, in COVID have turned out to be essentials, whether it be cleaners or porters or people who are simply delivering goods as we buy more and more online. So why do you do what you do? If you can see the value of it, then that enhances your resilience. Strengths, recognise what you're good at. Australians are not big at this sort of stuff, so if you get a spare 10 minutes, you write down, well, what are some of my strengths? Jot them down. They could be competencies in a work sense, but they could also be skills that you've learned in a leisure activity or a group that you might be involved with. We know people who have strong personal and professional networks are more resilient. So again, maintaining some of those networks. Now that could be virtual drinks on a Friday afternoon. It could be virtual quiz nights. It could be virtual gym attendance. Maintaining those networks makes individuals feel more resilient because they realise they're not alone, that they can turn to folks and vent if they need to. Maintain some perspective. Make sure that you look at all sides of the situation. Yes, things are not ideal at the moment for some of you, but there is bound to be some upside. And I don't mean that in a Pollyanna sense, but just trying to maintain some balance and trying to see that, well, if there's less work for me to do at the moment, then it could be finally the opportunity to get that marketing list together. Those of you in the service sector, it could be your client list is really what counts most. Here's your opportunity to cleanse it, update it, put it into a form that you can use it so that when business rebounds, you're good to go. And self-care, again, Seligman and others are hot on the fact that it's important to maintain your own physical and mental health. The 10,000 steps, right amount of sleep, right amount of hydration, all of those sorts of things. Again, it's reasonably well known these days. Similarly, you can encourage a team to do the same, and you can ask them questions and make some comments to assist them in that regard. Remind them about the value that they contribute to the team. Now, they might be the accounts payable clerk or the accounts receivable clerk. Without those folks, there's no money going in or there's no money going out. All of that gear is essential to a business. Acknowledge the many strengths that your colleagues may have, and don't be afraid to say that. Again, Australians are not big on giving those pats at the back, and it doesn't have to be syrupy as the Americans would talk about it. And of course, Australians culturally are different from Americans, but it can be a very down-to-earth, practical acknowledgement of someone's great skills. Encourage people to maintain their networks. Again, provide an alternate perspective in order for people to see a different perspective, and encourage them to maintain good physical health. Ask them what they've done today. Did they go for a walk? Did they do some online yoga or Pilates? What were the activities? And again, if they're lapsing, so to speak, you might encourage them to do that again, or do it with them. It's a way to get them back on board. Finally, again, if you or your staff do need help, then be proactive. Probably the worst thing you can do is to do nothing. So if you need some assistance outside of some of those things that I've spoken about already, and the vast majority of you will be fine. Again, you're unsettled and it's an unsettling period. There'll be a very small percentage of you who are struggling, and if that is the case, then you need to pop your hand up. Maybe reflect on the concern. Is it as bad as it seems? You might go to your financial advisor and he or she reminds you of a way that you can access some additional funds. You go to your business advisor and he or she advises you on how you might be able to save some rent or again, reduce them, to protect some cash flow. Phone a friend or a family member or a colleague and just use them as a sounding board, particularly those that you feel comfortable with and close to. Maybe raise your concern with your manager, or all of us have our managers. And I forgot to mention it earlier, those of you who are managers, you may still have managers or colleagues or board members. Don't be afraid to ask some of the questions that we've covered so far. Ask them how they're going and what can you do to help them. If things are, if you're still struggling, then most of you will have an employee assistance provider. So go to your EAP provider, or again, go to your local GP or local therapist. As I said, the bottom line is do something rather than nothing. Doing nothing is perhaps the worst thing that you can do. Now, our commitment to you was to go for about a half an hour, which I think I've done almost to the minute, and then receive any questions if anyone has any. And I think you can type in a message or a question via the chat box, and then my colleagues will help me to process those. So does anyone have a question that I can answer for them? Now, if you do have questions, and some of you know me, by all means, you feel free to call me at BDO or send me an email. I'm happy to speak with you individually. For those that don't, again, if you find the BDO Adelaide contact details, then I'm happy to get in touch with you individually. There's a whole lot of information out there around the psychological well-being of staff. It is important that you pay attention to that and look after them. You want to have those people that you've invested in so far there when business does rebound, and it's likely to be another 3, possibly 6 months where we sort of emerge from these strange times. So that's broadly the window that you might be thinking of. So again, coming up with some sort of active plan to manage that situation will help you and certainly help them. One question has come through: how often should you communicate? There's no real recipe other than regularly. Now, within BDO, we've been having communication the first couple of weeks once a day, and our managing partner has been doing online sessions, which has been very good. We're easing those back to every couple of days, but certainly once a week is not enough, twice a week is not enough. So again, if I had to pick an example, once a day initially, and then Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, so that there's a regularity. If you've got that, what is important is that if there's a cycle, you try and stick to that cycle because it's reassuring. So people know, again, those patterns of behaviour, they know to, if the communication's coming Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they know Wednesday morning to look out for that message or to diarise that team meeting. Another question is, how do you balance those who are working from work and working from home? Again, it is difficult. Again, if you can have those online sessions where even if some are face-to-face, maintaining that physical distance, and some are online, then people can see each other. So interestingly, how the technology can assist us to do both at once. Another question is, what is an EAP provider? Some of the larger organisations will have employee assistance programs. Those employee assistance programs are often funded by an employer, and they will engage an independent third party. And some of these are health psychologists, sometimes they're social workers, and so staff will have 1 or 2 or 3 free sessions per person that they can speak to someone confidentially outside of the organisation. So that's what an EAP is, a program is, and that's generally how it operates. And then the EAP provider reports back to the employer that the themes that are emerging and the frequency of contact whilst maintaining anonymity of those who have maintained that contact. So again, if you're a mid-sized organisation, it's probably appropriate to find an EAP provider, particularly at the moment. Another question, just let me have a look at that. The question around working from home, I'm concerned about some feeling deprived of the opportunity and others maybe feeling a bit of guilt as colleagues are having to go to work. But we will be entering an awkward period, I think, as we transition back to work, what work looks like, and will it be a blended approach? So I think it is important to try and clarify, and if it's a government agency trying to work out a policy or a procedure for determining who does work from home and what those circumstances might be, and how the specific team would deal with that, and getting agreement as much as you can from the participants about what is an acceptable ratio or balance for a period. Now, it might be for the next 3 months, and then or the next month, and then you review it at the end of that month. Again, it's also fair to say, this is not being harsh, but reminding staff and colleagues that the situation is strange at the moment. So it's difficult to adopt a more traditional paradigm to the way we might do work. And so there may necessarily be some exceptions. But again, providing an opportunity for people to speak with you about some of those exceptions, and if they have some concerns, then to raise some of those concerns with you. But certainly, again, just going back to those who are at work and those who aren't, again, as much as possible, trying to treat, trying to be fair, if you like, to all parties, those who are at work and those who aren't. And again, this is where these webcasts and media platforms of Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Skype is useful, because in fact you can have people together, at least in a virtual sense. Any last questions? Okay, maybe last call. So last question here. If a small company, who do you suggest the staff go to? Yes, well, certainly the current health system is geared towards GPs being a first port of call. Now that is changing with being able to directly access, for example, clinical psychologists and health psychologists. But certainly a good GP, and there's a whole variety of GPs out there, just as there's a whole variety of psychologists out there or social workers, will have certainly a broad skill set to be able to support and assist, and then in turn refer on an individual to some specific assistance. Many of those GPs, for example, are parts of larger clinics, and they may have allied health professionals in that clinic, and so they may again have a greater level of confidence and trust in those professionals to be able to refer them on. So that's a way a GP can assist, but yes, you can these days go directly to a local psychologist or a local therapist to seek that assistance. But certainly there's a number of avenues. I'm not that fussed, to be honest, where you go, other than do something. The worst thing you can do is to sit at home and worry or ruminate, and then that we start to see then the catastrophizing, the concern for people building, and then then it becomes a health issue. So certainly do something. All right, folks, we might wrap it up there. Thank you for coming along and signing into the session. As I said, if you want to make a direct contact after this, by all means, I think all of you will receive copies of the slides that I've used. And I do wish you well. Strange times, but I'm sure we'll get through this. So thank you for your time. All the best.